Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Paulina Cossette. In this episode, I talk with Molly Mullin, PhD. Molly shares her personal journey from tenured professor to successful freelance editor. We discuss the challenges and rewards of this career path and the practical steps involved in transitioning from academia to editing. Molly shares her story of leaving her tenured position, moving across the country for her family, and taking on editing work while also serving as adjunct faculty. She describes the specific skills and experience that scholars have that help them become successful academic editors, from understanding complex academic writing to navigating the nuances of different writing styles. She also explains how her academic network and her own books have attracted clients to her as an editor. We discuss the unique challenges and rewards of freelance editing, such as finally having true work-life balance, managing finances, and building a strong client base. And Molly shares her strategies for finding clients, marketing your business effectively, and the importance of client referrals and repeat business. Ultimately, this episode gets to the heart of why so many scholars are unhappy in academia, living far from family or in a place you don't like. One of the best benefits of freelance editing is that you can do it from anywhere with an internet connection. If you're fed up with academia or looking to bring in some extra money through a side hustle, listen to Molly share her experience of building her business into a full-time career that has brought her joy and fulfillment outside the academy. If you want to learn more about becoming an academic editor or coach, go to acadiaediting.com/become an editor. Welcome to Leaving Academia, Becoming a Freelance Editor, the podcast. I'm your host, Paulina Cossette. In 2019, I was a political science professor who was fed up with the stress and hostility of academia, not to mention the low pay. I left my tenure-track job and went from barely surviving to thriving as a freelance academic editor. Today, I own Acadia Editing Services, an editing and coaching business that brings in 6 figures a year. In this podcast, I'll discuss the challenges of academia, what academic editing involves, and what life as a freelancer looks like. If you're willing to jump outside your comfort zone, it is possible to find joy, true flexibility, and a profitable and rewarding career as an academic editor. Thanks for listening. Hi, Molly. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So you have a background as a tenured professor at a liberal arts college, but you've got into editing and you've been doing it for quite a while now. So why don't we start off? You could tell us a little bit about what you did as faculty and how you moved into editing.
Okay, I was a professor of anthropology, cultural anthropology, at a small liberal arts college in Michigan for 16 years. I did teach writing intensive courses there. And before I got my tenure track position, I actually worked for several years. I can't even remember how long, teaching in a university writing program. So I had a fair amount of experience teaching writing. I mentored a lot of thesis writers at the college. And I got experience doing a fair amount of publishing in academic journals. I published a monograph with the University Press on edited volume and contributed to other edited volumes. And I had a wide range of experience in academically. Cultural anthropology is already pretty interdisciplinary in a way, but I also taught in these various interdisciplinary programs. At any rate, I had a lot of academic experience, but then when I left my tenured position because of a family relocation, I didn't feel confident going straight into editing. And back then, there weren't all these courses like yours. And I mean, now you can take courses in academic editing and so on. Several people suggested to me when I mentioned being interested in working in editing, they were very encouraging and said, oh, yes, you should be a developmental editor. And in fact, my editor at Duke said, oh, you didn't have any trouble publishing your monograph. You can be a developmental editor. And I was intrigued, but I just didn't know really. And I didn't feel very confident. Fortunately, I had a friend, very, very good friend, who was the head of an academic press at the time. And she was willing to mentor me, and that was very helpful. But I decided to start out getting training in copy editing. In particular, I was interested in getting a certificate in editing from the University of Chicago's Graham School. And I started out taking their basic manuscript editing course, which at the time, this was in like 2012, it was like a boot camp in the Chicago Manual of Style. And I actually loved it. And I was already working freelance as an editor. I was working with authors at the time. So I was getting experience that way. And in the end, I decided I just didn't really have time to do the other courses in the certificate. Plus, it was, for me, kind of expensive at the time. And so I never got the certificate. I've never taken a course in developmental editing. That's probably most of what I do now. I started out doing more copy edit. I actually worked for university presses, copy editing manuscript. It was, for me, very good experience. Now, I've known several academics who've moved into editing, and they don't do that. They just do the developmental editing, maybe some line editing and so on. I really liked it. And I did feel like it gave me a way of getting my feet wet gradually in the editing world.
So you mentioned that the copy editing course at Chicago focused on Chicago style. Was it mainly leading you through like the rules of grammar and punctuation as opposed to how do you get published as a scholar?
It was a copy editing course.
Yeah.
So it wasn't about, you know, big picture issues with manuscripts or the world of academic publishing or anything like that. It was about, okay, you're given a manuscript to copy edit. How do you do that?
Mm-hmm.
Did it teach grammar? It's hard for me to remember. I don't think so, really. I would say one of the most important things I learned from it was somehow I had this idea that editors just have this immense knowledge of punctuation rules and formatting rules that they carry around in their heads and they can just access instantly. And to a certain extent, that's true. But what I was taught in the course over and over again is that you just spend so much time looking things up. Even if you think you know it, you look it up again. And you don't feel bad about it. You don't feel bad that you've forgotten that's for the 10th time or whatever. You just look it up. And, then we might decide, okay, well, how do you interpret Chicago Manual of Style? It doesn't actually, spell everything out. How much leeway? What if you don't like the recommendation? And so on. I also learned that it gave me a sense that I was reasonably good at this. And it's not the kind of thing that I would have known as an academic. Sure, I had worked with the copy editors who were working on my publications, but you don't know how you compare to other
I left academia in 2019 and we moved across the country to Maine. And I thought this would just be temporary. I thought, oh, I'll try to find some remote work that I can do until I get another job, like a real job. Um, and of course, I just fell in love with it. But yeah, I started out working for editing agencies, and in particular, Scribendi had a training program that they would pay you to go through before, you'd get hired and they'd pay you not very much, but better than nothing,
Yeah,
to go
yeah.
through. And then the process of just doing the editing for the 8 different agencies and getting that kind of that quality assurance, the QA people would check it. And they'd give you feedback. I think that was super helpful for me. That's how I learned the norms in the business. But what I think I'm hearing you say, at least, especially for developmental editing, is that you're really drawing on your experience as an academic author, or even just as
And a
a scholar
reader.
who consumes research. And that, like I've heard other people say they have this innate sense of what scholarship is supposed to sound like, right? Or how it's supposed to flow. Is that true for you when you're doing the developmental edits, that you just sort of know from your experiences as a researcher what a good book looks like, or what are
No,
you drawing on there?
I, I would say I draw a lot on my training as a writing teacher, actually, and as a reader. I read constantly, not the same kind of work that I edit nowadays, but I think it shapes my perspective. And then just as you were talking about experience, seeing so many manuscripts and seeing them develop over time has been what's taught me the most.
I mean, copy editing, I think you definitely have to learn the rules, and the how to use track changes. And I tell my students that, like, even if you use track changes in your own work, with co-authors, Microsoft Word has so many other layers that as an editor, you use all these tools you never considered as a writer. So there is a little bit of a learning curve there. It's not particularly difficult, but it's like extra stuff that you have to learn. But I think with the developmental editing, we as good writers have a sense of what a book, what structure that should take. Yeah. And I think for me too, looking at different manuscripts over time, I've learned what are the common questions to ask or things to look for in a manuscript. Is there a clear thesis? Is there a narrative thread throughout? Does each chapter's subthesis support the book's overall thesis, and those kinds of things?
I work with such a wide range. I do have my limits. I've learned there are certain fields I tend not to feel very comfortable with, and I'll tend to refer those authors to colleagues or just say no. But I do still take on a wide range of discipline disciplines and writing styles. One challenging thing early on was getting used to how authors have really different needs and styles for what works for them. And to give you an extreme case, very early on I worked with an author in my field. So I mean, in some ways that was kind of misleading because we were so alike in some ways, but our writing process was just so entirely different. And she was fairly experienced. She published several books, and I would say most of the authors who hire me, definitely not all, but many of them are turning their dissertation into a book or maybe writing a second book. She'd already published several books. She had done all the research, but she was very early in the writing process with this manuscript, and she was busy teaching. And she had been working with a coach, but it hadn't worked out real well. So she wanted to try working with me she was very clear on what she wanted. She wanted us to meet once a week. And before each meeting, she would send me a piece of a chapter or a draft of a part of a chapter, a few pages sometimes. And she didn't want any comments. Then she just wanted us to talk about it. And, I kept trying to kind of get at, well, what's this book going to be about? Like, what do you see as the argument of this book? She was like, oh, I don't work that way. I prefer for the argument to emerge organically. And it really freaked me out because I don't work that way. I mean, to an extent, like when I wrote, the argument was always a moving target. It changed over time. So I was used to being flexible in that way, but I was not used to just not having anywhere to sort of shoot for. So it kind of rattled me, but she was very assertive that no, this is what she wanted. So I just decided to go with it. And it's like, well, okay, this is what she wants. It was a bit nerve-wracking to me at first. It's like, well, what if it doesn't emerge organically? How are we ever going to get there? But we did. We kept meeting, and um, gradually it took shape. And then eventually she decided, okay, she wanted to work in a more typical process where she'd send me entire drafts of chapters and I'd send her back comments and then we'd talk about them. That's kind of more typically the way that I work. So that was, an interesting lesson for me in terms of how people do have different needs. Now, not everyone is so assertive. Not everyone knows what they really want. But I do think as an editor, it's important to try to recognize that not everybody has the same interests and needs and try to serve them the best you can.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. We are academics, we are editors, but we're also providing a service. And to do that well in a way that satisfies clients and makes them want to hire you again or refer you to other people, it does require a lot of flexibility. Because I've had the same experience. I've had a range of people from junior scholars who have never worked with an editor before, and they just totally rely on you to tell them how does this process work and what do I do, and they're very unsure and sort of need you to be a mentor to them. Um, to the other side of the spectrum, which you're describing, where the author knows very clearly what they want and how they want to do it, and they don't want to be told otherwise, and you just have to go with the flow unless it's something that, totally violates your process or what you're comfortable doing. But
And in
yeah,
her case, it really was the right process for her. It was just not one I was used to.
yeah, and I tell the members of my community too that flexibility also has to carry into things like payment options. You have to offer people a variety of ways to pay you and work with them on timing. And, sometimes they say they're going to get you a manuscript by Monday, but something comes up and they can't. And so it does take, you have to be prepared for that, I think. But let's go back to, you were talking about how you left academia to move across the country. And I'm curious about what that process and that experience was like for you, because I know when I was trying to make the decision to leave, it was scary and nerve-wracking, and I had so much guilt about letting people down because I was deciding in the summer, even though I was supposed to teach in the fall. And I was worried I was going to regret leaving or regret moving or whatever. And so I'm curious what that was like for you and how you moved through it to finally make the decision to leave teaching.
It was really hard. It was hard. I think I didn't feel quite so bad about letting people down because I'd gotten really burned out in my workplace and felt like I'd been treated badly. And I wasn't trying to say, screw you. There were complicated things going on that impinged on the decision that nobody knew anything about. And I won't even talk about it here, not because it's secret, but it's just not really the place for it. But I just happened to be at a stage where I didn't feel a lot of guilt about that, though I think people would say that I should, and I don't care. Yeah, that wasn't it for me. For me, it was more just knowing that chances are I would never get an tenure track academic job again. And so then not knowing what the options were. And I thought about going into academic administration. I had done a little bit of that, not a lot. And I talked to people, and people weren't, number one, they weren't that encouraging. I don't know why. They weren't all that encouraging. And then also, I had the sense that this is not what I love. I, I just didn't know if I would like that kind of work or that it would draw on my strengths. I felt like I could do it, but yeah, I wasn't sure it was the best fit. I went back to my very old job adjuncting initially.
After you
Um,
moved.
yeah.
Mhm.
So for years, in fact, I taught as an adjunct. Some of the same courses I taught before I got my tenure track job 16 years earlier. Boy, was that weird. In some ways, it was a blast. I got to really focus on teaching after having been part of a faculty at a college that required a lot of administrative work, running programs and politics and stuff. It was so fun to just kind of zoom in and out of campus, do my job, and leave. I got to the point where I did it really well. I just felt like it was very rewarding work. I was making a huge difference in students' lives, and I enjoyed it so much more than I ever had when I was worried about, the direction of the programs that I was involved in, and the overall situation of my institution, all of that. But of course, it didn't pay well. And
Were
also
you
in time,
were
sorry,
you
go ahead.
editing at the same time as you were
I
adjuncting?
was.
Okay.
I was. And so I was juggling all these different things, which was fine. For a while, as I was getting started, I kind of liked that, doing different things. Eventually, I felt like financially it no longer made sense. I could make more money editing than I could make as an adjunct professor, and it was less stressful because the teaching did start getting more stressful. There were on campus shootings occurring, and you know we had these warnings, you have to evacuate the classroom or go in lockdown mode. And I led very discussion oriented classes, and the politics of the classroom leading up into the first Trump administration. I was just dealing with stuff I hadn't actually ever seen before. And I felt like this is really for somebody who is tenure track, who's on campus, who's all in. I'm not all in for these students who really need me. I'm in and out. So I quit. And yeah, I haven't I haven't looked back.
Yeah, I used to teach US politics. That was my area. I was 8 months pregnant and I with my first child, and I had to go to a mandatory active shooter training where other faculty and staff were like very excitedly practicing barring the door with tables, and they were into learning how to do this. And I was just standing there horrified, like, I can't do this anymore. And then I had to come back, and after my maternity leave, I had to teach the US presidency, and that was in what, spring of 2018 or something like that. And yeah, it was awful. So yeah, it's among many other challenges that I had at other schools too. So I hear you on that. But
Yeah, I have the actual Nazi in one corner and then the evangelical Christian in the other, the refugees in the middle, and
yeah, it's a lot to manage. So when you quit your adjunct position, how did you start to build your editing business up to
I've
go
been
full
building it.
time?
I've been building it all that time. And I only quit the adjuncting when I felt like it made sense.
And were you still working for the university presses, or you were starting to reach out to private clients, or
I
how did
know I
that
was
work?
no longer working with University Press. And even when I was working with University Presses, I was working with authors,
Hmm.
individual authors. So it's never just University Presses. But by that point, I was working pretty exclusively with authors. I say pretty exclusively because I now edit a journal that's funded by UNESCO. And I was hired to do that by an author who I work with, but I edit lots of authors' work through that venue. That it's not the actual person who hired me, but it's not a university press. I work with that professor's postdocs, helping them learn about the editing process. So I do that. And then I did some work for an academic institute here that was publishing scholars' works online. I think I might have been doing that around the time I stopped adjuncting.
And how do you get connected with something like that? Did you just send them an email and ask if they needed an editor,
I've
or?
never sent anyone any emails. I mean, I think certainly that's a great thing to do. And I know people who have, and it's worked out well for them. I never needed to do that. People found me online, and I would say one of my weaknesses in this business is I don't really like the, I don't know, not like the marketing process. And I mean, just keeping up my website, I'm not very good at it. Like I've been meaning to add some important stuff to it for 3 or 4 months now, and I haven't gotten around to it. But yeah, people find me. The Editorial Freelancers Association is helpful. I did get listed on several universities have lists of editors for hire. I didn't, I've never gotten many clients that way, but a few. And then I've gotten a lot word of mouth through connections. So my
Yeah.
academic network has been extremely helpful.
Yeah, that was another way that I got started, was contacting the electronic thesis and dissertation offices and asking to be put on their lists. And I did that years ago when I first started editing, and I still get inquiries from, of course, it's almost always graduate students, but I have had some faculty contact me. I think they go to that office, or if it's housed in the writing center or something, they ask for an editor referral and they give them this list. So yeah, I think if you can put yourself in as many places as possible on the internet, then it makes it easier for people to find you. Do you use social media very much, or it sort of feels like a rat
Personally,
race? So
personally, I use it,
yeah.
but because I was an academic for so long, my personal social media network is it tends to be a very academic network, and I've definitely gotten clients that way, not because I'm trying to get clients, but actually I just recently connected with somebody who would not be a client, but somebody who I could refer work to. And I was thrilled about that. And I've actually known her for years, but I didn't know that she was doing editing. And it turns out like is perfect fit in terms of like I'll definitely at times be able to refer clients to her. And so social media was really helpful in that way. You know, I hate LinkedIn. I wish I were better at it. Maybe occasionally I've gotten some clients, but I don't, yeah, I've never really been that motivated to get more clients because I mean, since I started editing, I've pretty much, most of the time I'm booked at least a few months in advance and clients have found me. But I have made sure to have my information out there so that they'll find it if they're looking for someone. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think, it feels like when you first start, you have to hustle a bit to try to get the jobs. And then once you get this base of clients, it sort of snowballs from there. And I mean, the feast or famine story is sort of true. I think it seems like all the work tends to come in at one point, and then other times there will be lulls in it. But I think that's more to do with the academic calendar. And I think this summer I had this mountain of inquiries at the end of August when everybody's desperately trying to be productive at the end of the summer. And then it quiets down a lot in September, October because everybody's so busy with teaching. But yeah, I think if you can hustle in the beginning and then get that base of clients, you'll have a steady stream of referrals or people who are coming back to you again, asking you to work on another project. Or, I have clients that I edited their dissertation and then they had me edit their job market letters and then they wanted to turn their dissertation into a book. And so,
I've
you
done that
know,
too. Yeah.
yeah, and it's fun because you get to know them and you build those relationships even though it's all totally remote. If there is if there are people out there, um who we know there are people out there who are unhappy in academia, and I think that your story is a common one, having these being unhappy with the administration, feeling all this burnout and this pressure to perform so much with teaching and administering and all this stuff, and then wanting to move across the country to be with your family and that sort of thing. If there are people out there who are facing this decision and they want to do something else, they are curious about editing, they want to take the leap, how can they make that decision? How, having done this yourself and probably seen other people, how can they make the decision? How do they just go for it? Or what do you suggest for somebody who's wanting to start an editing business today, getting started? What should they do? What's a couple pieces of advice?
I do have some friends who are still in academia and actually pretty happy in academia, and they take on editing jobs. And that's one possibility to do it gradually. So rather than, I mean, you might not like it. And so it's a way to find out, as well as build up a clientele if you do decide to take the leap or you lose your job or something. That happens. Sometimes it's not voluntary. Yeah, for me, I was able to do what I did and to succeed at it because of a lot of luck, as well as being willing to make sacrifices. So, I gave up the benefit of tuition for my college tuition for my kids, and they're now both at state university schools, public universities. I sacrificed a lot and I was really lucky.
But
So
maybe,
what I,
they could start a website or, like you said, start trying it while they're still working. Maybe edit a paper for a colleague or something, or just to see how they like
you
it.
could
Or,
even you could take courses. You could take it. I mean, now there are so many more editing courses online, and I wouldn't really worry about getting a certificate. In From my perspective, authors don't really care whether you have a certificate, but they do kind of like to see that you have some sort of training as an editor. I think. I mean, it's not necessarily the reason they would hire you, but people mention, oh, I saw you trained as an editor. That's cool. Uh,
do
and
you
you could
think
do,
your PhD and your own experience as an author publishing books has helped?
yes, definitely.
That clients
Definitely.
like to see that?
Yes. I mean, some actually hire me specifically because of that, and they even know my work. I've had some scholars tell me, oh my gosh, I can't believe I was able to hire you. I read your book in grad school.
Oh, that must feel good.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. But yeah,
Well,
I think you could take forays into it gradually and build up expertise, which would leave you in a stronger position if you did decide to leave. And then who knows, maybe things at your job would change, or you would get another academic job that you like better. I mentored a friend of mine who left academia, and she became pretty successful doing editing and she loved it. But then she got recruited for an academic job and she decided to go back to that. So it can happen.
that's funny. Is she happy with that decision, or does she wish she had stayed in editing?
No, she's happy. She doesn't
Yeah.
like the location, or she's not thrilled with it. And it's been an adjustment. It was not where she would have chosen to live,
Hmm.
but it's a great job.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she likes the job. So
Well, that's I think that's a great suggestion that, that people can just sort of dip their toe in the water and try it out or take a course and while they're still teaching, and there's less stress because you still have the income from your full-time job, but you can pick up a little extra on the side and see how you like it. And you can edit one paper a week or one paper a month or whatever it is that you feel like taking on, or do it in the summer when you have a bit more time or something. So yeah, I think that's a great piece of advice. So if anybody out there wants to work with you as an editor, where can they find you and get in touch?
my website is mollymullin.com. That's Mullin. Uh, I'm also listed in the Editorial Freelancers Association directory. You can search for editors with particular expertise. My name would come up under anthropology, history, and a few other things.
Great. Well,
Yeah.
thanks so much for joining me, Molly. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, really nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Okay, bye.
If you're unhappy in academia and you think you might be a good editor or writing coach, check out my course, Becoming an Academic Editor. This digital course is paired with a 12-week group coaching program to support you through your decision to leave academia or not, and to start building a profitable and rewarding academic editing business. Learn more by going to acadiaediting.com/become an editor. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time.